Rich Lee from the Hall Institute of Public Policy, and welcome to the Hall Institute Public Forum. Today we have the first in what I hope will be a series of special shows focusing on media, the media industry in New Jersey, that we're kind of grouping together under the title New Jersey Media Landscape, a Hall Institute Roundtable. And we're doing these because journalism in New Jersey and all across the country is at a critical juncture. The global economic crisis has made it more difficult to produce quality news by reducing staff and resources for news organizations. The internet has radically changed the way people get news, the way news is reported, and also it's undercut the economic base of a lot of journalism. But today we're fortunate to have an individual with me who's been in the newspaper business for 70 years, has some great stories, can give us a great perspective on what's happened in the past, what's happening today, and maybe some words of advice about the future. So I'd like to welcome Sid Dorfman, the president and founder of Dorf Feature Service.
Thank you.
Sid, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Okay. Before we get started, this is a live webcast. If you're watching us live, I'd encourage you to look for the chat icon on your screen, click the live stream tab, and if you have a question or a comment, just enter it, and we'll try to answer it while we're doing the program. So with that said, 70, 75 years, some incredible amount of time. I think having worked in the newspaper business myself for a while, I think there's a certain intangible quality about it that anyone who's worked in it feels. And what's special about newspapers to you? Why have you worked in this, devoted your life's work to newspapers?
Well, I won't say anything profound. It's sort of it's in your blood, just like painting may be, or some other objective that you just got to do it because that's what you were. I was published when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
I was.
I knew you got your first newspaper job at 15, but this even predates that.
Well,
right?
About my first newspaper job, that's exactly 75 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was 15 years old at the time, and it was dead center. Look how we've come full circle. It was dead center in the greatest depression this country has ever known.
We're in an economic crisis now.
And now, after 75 years, we're back in something. Well, it isn't as bad as it was then, but bad enough.
Yeah. Well, let's go back. You were starting to tell me that at the age of 9, you actually had something published.
Well, it's a kind of funny story. I used to read the Newark Evening News. Mm-hmm. That was the standard newspaper in New Jersey. It was the leading state paper. And they had a page there, rather a novelty page, if you will. The readers were invited to write whatever they want to write in the way of stories, poems, or what have you, and they would be published. But the news was very smart about it. They required nicknames.
Oh.
They didn't want you to use your real name because they felt some of the stuff was so bad they wouldn't want to, embarrass it. Well, I picked a name called The Loon. I had written a story called, I don't remember the name. It was a little story that I wrote about a horse and an owner, and I had sent it to the Saturday Evening Post, and they wrote back to me. I still have the letter from the editor, who said 9 is a little too young to. Try us a little later, we'll appreciate it. So I said, well, that's the way you want it, okay. And then I learned about this news page in the Newark Evening News. So I sent in my great creation. And I took the nickname of the Loon. Had I known what the Loon meant, I might not have done it. But maybe I was loony to do it. But at any rate, I took the nickname of the Loon, and sure enough, about 6 or 7 weeks later, I opened up that paper, and there was my story. So it's truthful to say that I was published at the age of 9.
Okay. Do you still get a thrill when you see your byline in the paper? I know you're still writing a column on a regular basis.
Well, I don't get a thrill as such from the byline, but I get a big kick out of knowing that I've written something that maybe a number of people will enjoy.
Right.
We're doing well enough with the column. About 15, 20 years ago, Mort Pye took a survey, and I finished on top, so to speak, in this respect. Dave Klein, who was the columnist for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
He finished first, and I finished second, and then others came behind me. And Mort explained that I was number one because the only reason they voted for Dave Klein was that he wrote about the Giants. I said, I'll accept that.
So, okay, let's talk about, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, one of the reasons we're doing this series is because of what's happening in the industry today. You've obviously seen other changes. How does, like, the internet coming along compare to maybe radio, TV, some of the other things? Is it another change like that, or is the internet just so unprecedented compared to other changes?
It's an added product. You know, we originally had newspapers, so to speak, and then the radio came along, and it didn't knock out the newspapers. And then television came along, and it didn't knock out radio. And the internet is here today, and certainly it's not going to knock out the television or anything else. I think what we all hope is that we can live together, and we have certain qualities which the rest of us don't have. I think newspapers have a certain quality in the sense that you just, it's there, you lay it down on the table, you read it at any time you like, and you can go back to it. On the other hand, if you take news from television, if you blink, you may miss it.
True, yeah.
You see? And insofar as the web is concerned, well, you're going to put it on at a certain time, and you're going to gather your news from it. But you've got to remember one thing. In order to get the kind of news you may be looking for, the web has got to have a staff to produce it. For example, the Door Feature Service works for NewJersey.com. So that, in a sense, we provide the information for them. They need our staff.
Right.
You see, if we weren't around, they would have to create one, and that could make a little bit of a difference in the operation for them. I hope they succeed. That isn't what I'm referring to, but everyone has its own, you know, problems, and I think we can. I said this to Donald Newhouse. I hope I was accurate, that we will all live together.
Yeah, I think, as you said, the two can complement each other. And what I've heard from a number of other people who've been in the industry a long time is that the bulk of original reporting is done by newspaper, by print journalists, and then gets aggregated, put onto news sites. Wonder, if you could. I'm interested in learning maybe how your business, adapted to the internet. But first, people who may not be that familiar with what Door Feature Service is, can you explain to people watching exactly what DORF is?
Door Feature Service, I formed it in 1938. Actually, I didn't form it, I inherited it. And I think that by itself is rather interesting because a fellow named, I forget his name, if you'll forgive me. He created the Door Feature Service. He created the Metropolitan News Service. And Stuart Morrison, the name comes back to me now. And Stuart Morrison operated that bureau, and he hired me to be the sports editor. I was the only one in the sports department, so I accepted the title. And he operated it for about 6-7 months, and at some point, 2 or 3 months after he began operating, he hired a girl named Fritzie. I don't think I'm revealing something when I use her first name. And the Stuart Morrison and Fritzie got along famously. And about 9 months after he had opened the bureau, the Metropolitan News Service, he ran away with Fritzie. And he left behind a small staff, myself included, and he took the payroll, of course. So I went over to the paper and I said, well, I'm willing to take over if you let me. Now, I guess I was about 16 at the time, and that didn't seem to bother them. They said, well, we negotiated for a day or two, and they said, all right, kid, take a shot at it. We had an office in the so-called Proctor building on Market Street in Newark. It's above a theater. And so I went there and I created the Door Feature Service. And the the first work we had to do was provide sports coverage, to do the racing forms, charts, and to make police checks. So already we were a little bit busy.
Right.
And as time went on, we acquired different projects. And at one point, I would say, perhaps in the 60s, that we contributed as much as 50% of the editorial product of the paper.
Wow.
An awful lot of work.
Yeah.
And by then, I had over 100 people working there. Yep.
So now, you know, with the internet, what sort of changes have you had to make in your operation?
Well, with the internet, the paper started the NewJersey.com.
Right.
And they have no staff. What they're taking is material that's already printed in a Star Ledger. From us, they take a very large high school sports program. I think it's the most critical thing they take. Now, I'll make that the second most critical. The first is the obituary page.
Right, okay.
I created that in 1960, and much to Sam Newhouse's pleasure. And today, I think it's the leading money maker in the paper.
Yeah, which actually reminds me of an interesting point. I mean, you're, in addition to being a successful journalist, a successful businessman, and there's a quote that, like in some of my talks, I refer to from Max Frankel, who was the executive editor of the New York Times, where he says he could never figure out if he was supposed to be running a good newspaper to make money, or if he was making money to run a good newspaper. And how do you balance, you know, the business side of the business and the journalism side?
I think you just used the key word, balance. I think, obviously, it has to be a little of both. Every editor, every publisher has to think in terms of making money for their newspaper. They want a quality production, obviously. They hire people who can provide it for them. Today, these are a lot of young people who have come along to fill in for people who have been bought out.
Yeah.
And some of them aren't bad at all, but they're the ones that you rely upon for some quality newspaper work. But again, the management is so preoccupied with keeping the paper alive,
Right.
that money is on their mind as they go to sleep and when they wake up.
Yeah, because it's a business and it's a industry that provides news and information. Yeah. How do you feel about the industry today? I know today it seems like people in the media are not held in that high esteem, or people criticize the media a lot. Was it always that way, or do you remember a turning point where, you know, people suddenly seem to be down on the media? Or?
Oh, I don't. I guess I would have to. Oh, it has happened.
Yeah.
We've lost a lot of dignity, if you will, and we don't fill up a newspaper with what we would ordinarily have filled it up with. A lot of stuff doesn't get in anymore. That's because we don't have the staff to produce it. So what we do is try to survive. You want to put out a decent newspaper as best you can, and at the same time you can't do it at a price that's prohibitive. So you draw a balance there. I think that's happening here. I think the New York Times has done it quite well, and we know that they've lost circulation.
Right, yeah. Everybody has.
They've lost money.